Good evening. Welcome again. Sorry for being a bit late. I had a little tech issue with my computer. Today we'll continue to discuss the artists that lay the foundation for today's art. We've discussed artists from the 1960s, metaphysical artists, the conceptual art of the end of the 60s, the beginning of the 70s, and Sot art was also discussed in various aspects. We had a look at the Moscow stages in the evolution of the style. And now it's time to embark on a new generation of artists that joined the Moscow underground in the first half of the 1970s. Before we do that, before we talk about intellectual artists and Andrei Monastyrski and Nikita Alexeev, I wanted to have a look at the context of non-traditional art, non-official art at the stage. The visual context is still dictated by the Soviet context with very standardized, highly censored images created in the method of social realism. And it's not just an official exhibition, it's also monumental art that blossomed during this time. Meanwhile, unofficial art continues to exist in the underground. It sets its boundaries, and after the bulldozer exhibition of 1974, the world of non-conformist art is broken down into two uneven parts. A lot of the artists, representatives of different generations, despite the situation being made a bit easier by the state, they pack their suitcases and go on to travel the world into immigration. Back then, they thought that they were leaving forever. Unofficial Soviet art continues to be exhibited abroad in different configurations, various curator choices. One of the big retrospectives of New Soviet art was held in 1977 in Venice, organized by the Venice Biennale, and the famous Italian curator Enrico Spotti tried to present the multitude and the variety of the styles that at that point were part of the Soviet unofficial art. Of course, this wasn't the only extensive retrospective. It was known as the Biennale of the Dissidents. There were also exhibitions in Switzerland and Germany, large retrospective exhibitions in Torino, in Italy, as well. Those that had immigrated were, of course, counting on support from the cultural establishments of those countries. Unfortunately, not all their hopes came true. The Russian immigration of that wave cannot be considered successful for various reasons that we're not going to go into. Another part of the unofficial circle of Moscow was counting on the change in the state politics in this field. After the bulldozer exhibition, others, the second open air exhibition at Izmailova was allowed, followed by two big exhibitions in Moscow, the non-conformist exhibition at VDNH in 1975. Even the conservative St. Petersburg, Leningrad environment was allowed to make exhibitions at the Gas Factory House of Culture and the Nevsky Exhibition Hall. At the Begovaya Moscow Union of Artists, an exhibition was held with Mikhail Erginsky, whose work you can see they take up almost the entire wall of this official exhibition space. The exhibition from 1976 did not help Mikhail Erginsky to evolve, and next year he did leave the country as well. In 1977, the first exhibition of art at the Gorkom of graphists is opened, and it becomes a space for underground art. For a lot of the artists, this was one of the opportunities to showcase their works to the wider audiences. The opening of this first exhibition was accompanied by a lot of interest. The entire intellectual part of Moscow came in crowds to see these exhibitions. They were held dozens of times per year. This is the exposition from 1979, the color, the form, the space, the small Gruzinska street where the exhibition hall was located. Gradually, the Soviet authorities, bit by bit, were releasing this art from underground. There was a group of artists in this environment that did not intend to leave, but at the same time, they did not want to interact or play any games with the state. These are artists that existed in an isolated circle. They only talked within a small community of their friends, and this was enough for Viktor Pivovarov, for Kabakov, for Erika Bulatov, that did not participate in all of these Gorkom exhibitions, that did not interact with the state at any level, that were trying to distance themselves as much as possible from political commentary with respect to the Soviet cultural politics. And they continued to actively work. They continued to get together at Kabakov's workshop, in other apartments, and other workshops to discuss the recent projects, to show the recent works. And it wasn't only a way to see what this union of those that refused to join anybody were up to. It was also important that it was at these very isolated platforms, inaccessible for the wider public. This is where the discourse would be formed, a discussion system, a system to discuss artistic works that had no descriptive language in Soviet criticism previously. There was no way to methodologically analyze them. And to develop this environment, a sculptor of Igor Shukovsky, a sculptor, an unofficial historian, having left the Soviet Union, but he continued to interact with his Soviet friends. He continued to bring together works for a magazine called Aya. AZ. It's started to be published in France, in Russian, French, and English in 1979. This is the first issue of the magazine. It contained a lot of materials on the various artists that represented contemporary Russian art. They were not considered to be artists back home. The article that opened this issue was written by Boris Groys. It was called The Moscow Romantic Conceptualism. Among the various characters of this article were the artists that we're going to be talking about today: Andrei Monastyrski and Nikita Alexeev as co-participants of the collective action group. These young authors, by 1979, they had already accumulated their intellectual capital, their artistic capital, and they continued to actively work in the field of contemporary art at the end of the 60s, the beginning of the 70s. They were great friends. They met at the end of the 1960s at Kasma, an Estonian resort that a lot of the Bohemian layer of Moscow would frequent quite happily. And the time that we've got left will be dedicated to their contribution to the transformation of the artistic language of the Russian unofficial school. Andrei Monastyrski, incidentally, as Nikita Alexeev, was known at the end of the 60s and in the Bohemian Moscow, among the Bohemian Moscow youth. He was known as a poet. He went to the Moscow State University, the philological faculty, and his thesis was dedicated to the works of Nikolai Liskov. He wrote experimental poetry, heavily impacted by the Leonozovo poets, with allusions to a surrealistic poetics. In 1971, for the first time, he, having started with reflecting on political discourse, he created his first experimental work called Resuming. This is the manuscript. It's not a poem. It seems to be a state of 7 people. The way he contemplated this work, and well, this is what his breakthrough method was about. Andrei Monastyrski tried rather than working with poetic constructions using various tropes, he would analyze the tropes themselves. For instance, the Anna Cruiser. You can see the examples on the screen. Below each line, you'll see the rhythm and description of the poetic structure that anyone who was working with poetry would know about, thanks to Brusov works, who wrote a textbook for beginner poets. So what happens if we take out the text? We are left with the pure geometry, the graphical structure, and the rhythm. Which is correlated with 2 very important processes for Monastyrski: breathing and gestures. You can sing this text, you can knock it on a table as any other work. If you look at the rhythm of any poetical piece, dactyl, amphibrach, anapis, you can also write them down. in a coded graphical inscription, and they can be played out without using any words. This is his poem. Well, it doesn't look like a traditional poem. It looks more like a musical score for the 7 states that impacts the ones next to it, and then is played out in an interaction of energies, breathing, gestures, and the movements of the holders of the state. And this leads to his project called Elementary Poetry, gradually stepping away from traditional poetry making and verse making. He transitions to a conceptual understanding of poetry as an action, an act. Poetry as an action. This is 1972, 1974. This is when this idea came about. Monastyrski continues to experiment with futuristic poetical forms, stepping further away from the classical legacy of the silver century that most Soviet poets were mostly captivated by, including underground poets. Here we can see Monastyrski reading one of his earlier poetic cycles, so we'll watch a couple of minutes. Dedicated to Alec Rubinovich.
Вилнонсен, Весненсен, Веснит, Бенсен, Весненсен, в глубинность Поленсен, небесность Вернит, Бенсен, Верненсен, Полейнсен, Холми, Бенсен, воронность Веснит, Бенсен, нездельность Веринсен, веринность Вводенсен, вводенность Дороженсен, в единость
Введенсен. Принцип понятен, да? Формирование звукоритмических
So these are sound and rhythmical constructs that are formed, so we can note the pattern, and this poetry is not closer to Pasternak or Mandelstam, but it's closer to the experiments of the Zaumniki of the beginning of the 20th century, and this is exactly the tradition that I think helped Monastyrski evolve as an individual author and as a member of the collective action group that we're going to be talking about next Thursday. Concurrently with this, the series of elementary poetry continues, not with the writing of these intellectual constructs, but it becomes a series of objects that have a form, but these are not static objects. The first of these objects are the famous canon by Monastyrski. It's a black box, a cardboard box, hanging on a wall with a cardboard tube, which is also painted black. There is an electric cord that comes out in the bottom with a switch on the front part, an instruction for the viewers that need to bring the eye closer to the tube and press the switch. What happens when one brings the eye close to the pipe and switches the switch? Instead of getting some kind of visual impression that they expected, they're looking into the darkness, into the depth of the tube, they hear an electrical a bell. For several moments, there is an emptiness that occurs in one's consciousness that occurs because of this distortion of one's sensory expectations. Instead of a visual impression, they get an audio impression. And one's consciousness turns into a blank space for the creation of meanings. And this is the field of representation that Andrei Monastyrski is targeting with all of his works. He does not probably trust the aesthetics in the traditional sense of the word. He insists on the functionality of his elementary poetic objects and on the fact that an interested viewer is his constant co-author. Another work in the series was launched in December 1975 called The Heap at Andrei Monastyrski house on a table in the hall. A heap started to form, and his guests would contribute objects from the pockets of their pants, their coats. These would be aspirin tablets, forgotten combs, medical prescriptions, and the heap would grow. And in Moscow, they would talk about having to go to Monastyrski's house and feed the heap. And then several weeks later, Monastyrski's mother came to clean his son's apartment, and the first heap disappeared as a result. But there was a documented list of who contributed what and when, and this project would get resumed on a number of occasions. It turned out that a scenario is required for this types of works. That's the only thing that's required, and this way an enactment is enabled. The poetical sense of the heap was a constellation of everyday objects, people's emotions that would come to visit him. And this is the source that the poetics of today is made up of, rather than symbolistic constructs of the poetry of the beginning of the 20th century that continued to occupy the minds of the wider poetical circle. Poetry as a construct, poetry as a piece of everyday life, as something physical rather than lyrical, however odd that might seem, continuing to contemplate the possibilities of the method, Monastyrski creates a number of other objects that were part of the elementary poetics cycle. The breather, it's a shoebox. Again, it has no aesthetic properties. It's not pretty. It doesn't look attractive. There's nothing to look at all. This is a box, a shoebox painted black in the frontal space. There is a pipe and there is a balloon attached to it on the inside. When you start to blow, into this cigar tip, you feel that something is blocking you. Your breathing does not continue as a regular physiological function. It comes against certain tension. And this disconnect between what one might expect and the actual physical effort created an aesthetic tension that is exactly what Monastyrski was going for, to create this impossible hermeneutic object that would make one feel something that they're not expecting. A certain state that would clear up the space that Monastyrski is trying to address, the viewer's consciousness. This is emphasized by one of his later works called The Finger. The finger pointing at oneself as an object that's external to oneself. It's a mechanism of alienation, which is again manifested through an anesthetic black box, an instruction on a piece of paper at the bottom. The viewer has to put the index finger through the box, through the hole, and be surprised by the fact that it's pointing at their own forehead. And it's not the aesthetic quality of the box that's highlighted, but the conceptual meaning of the space where the image is formed. This thought form about the fact that the consciousness is what formulates the image was key for Andrei Monastyrski, just like Kabakov, Pivovarov, and many others that decided to lock themselves up in the ivory tower, not allowing any interactions with the audience. The official exhibitions would open this sort of art to thousands of viewers, but these artists like Nikita Alexeev and Andrei Monastyrski would live in this isolated environment where they would understand each other without words, and there was no need to explain the meaning of any piece of art. No need to have to fight xenophobic moods, and the status that the representatives of this classical conceptualist circle selected representatives of the Moscow conceptual romanticism was behind the development of the branch that wasn't pursuing the material nature of the artistic object, but a completely different principle for building artistic quality. These criteria were described by Monastyrski in his texts and other texts by Nikita Alexeev, among others. This quality is what Monastyrski calls positive misunderstanding. In one of his texts, he wrote that, so when I'm looking at the work and I understand everything, everything is transparent, everything is straightforward, it's on the surface, it stops being interesting because it has no depth. I'm interested in creating such pieces of art that make me go on a hermeneutic journey with a multitude of interpretations. And this is the quality for very hermeneutic objects that are doomed to be misunderstood. This is what became fundamental for this branch of the Moscow Conceptual School. This is a quality that's illustrated by the object called the cap from 1983. We can see a cap with a label on it, which urges the viewer, the user, to pick it up. You pick up the cap, and below you can see another label. You can put it down, but you can't understand it. And this lack of obvious understanding of an action or an object is what becomes an aesthetic guideline for several generations of Russian artists. And this is something that we're going to observe in the 90s. towards the end of the century, but the basis of this aesthetics is what we find in the art of Andrei Monastyrski and his close circle. This aesthetic quality is supplemented and illustrated by a cycle of objects KD, collective actions. This is a series that was created in 1985. It was exhibited in Monastyrski apartment again in 1985. We can see one of these objects called walking. We're going to look at the groups out in a week and getting a bit ahead of ourselves. I'll say that one of the simpler functions of a human being is walking, it's moving, getting closer, getting further away from various objects. And the way Monastyrski illustrates this category is with this heavy board, two boards, in fact, that are connected. There's a white rope with a massive knot, and behind them is a semi-seasonal coat that can't be seen, unwrapped, used, a completely strange, dysfunctional thing that has no aesthetic function whatsoever. The material nature of this work, its hermetic, isolated nature pushes the interested viewer to switch on the mechanism of interpretation and to attempt to unravel this safe, this intellectual mystery box that either contains nothing or hides endless treasures. And a lot of Monastyrski followers, a lot of his fans were leaning towards the fact that it were these objects that possess incredible power, not so much in terms of their artistic qualities, but their way to stimulate discourse, which Monastyrski considers to be the most important process in art. Another object within the series was called weights, a scheme for weights. And this would link the character of the viewer with the character of the artist by this plank that brings the two together. And this is what generates meaning. The way this category is illustrated in the works of Monastyrski from 85, it's a long brown box with inscriptions and labels, again, a white rope with massive knots. The one thing that we can say here is that inside there are two winter hats, 3-kilo weights, and two enema bulbs. We don't know if that's actually true. I held the box in my hands. There is something inside. I could feel it, but we don't know what it is. And this secrets of multiple meanings that the artist consciously encloses in this physically unpleasant body, not only encloses but ties up with these very heavy knots, which are somewhat reminiscent of the works of surrealist. And this brings him closer to surrealists rather than conceptualists, unlike what a lot of people believe. And this is a tempting perspective for an artist that comes after Monastyrski. And in the Garage collection, there is a work that's very similar in meaning from the group of medical hermeneutic inspection called The Trophy Question. You will have seen it, of course, if you have seen garage exhibitions. Another hermeneutic piece from the Cadet series, again held within the Garage collection, starting from this summit represented in the open storage series. It has to do with one of the actions called M, a metaphorical series developed by Monastyrski presumes not only these brutal elements such as the white rope with heavy knots, but the symbolism of Soviet railways, railway worker uniforms, and the whole image of the railway as an image of movement from point A to point B, not just as a geographical movement, but as a metaphor for life and death of people. It's always finite. And this is a topic that Monastyrski explores through the metaphor of railway stops. These are places of existential development and the finite nature of this development. This is an erotic collage from Guten Tag, a German magazine, an image of the existential nature of art and its inevitable existential presence in a work of art that can consider to be successful is a part of a lot of his works. I can hear, I can breathe is not so much an object, it's a happening. And Monastyrski himself, as a character, is wearing a railway worker heavy coat and with a hairdo like a Chinese traveler. And from this is Chinese Zen aesthetics. There are rubber pipes going from his nostrils that go through a black cardboard box with a metal rod that plays the role of a detonator. When he breathes out through the tube, he can hear his own breathing. And this is a way for him to bring his presence back into the world, to get to the source of any artistic act, to life, to breathing, to the rhythm that gets our hearts going and that sets the rhythm for a work of contemporary art. There are a lot of different strange objects among Monastyrski works that are difficult to analyze, but they're incredibly curious. This is a challenge that's incredibly curious to undertake, and any interpretation that might come to your head might will be the right one, because there are no absolute answers in this type of art. This fluidity of meaning that emerges when the image unravels in the consciousness of the viewer, that the author isn't opposing any meanings, any false meanings. In all of his aspects, Andrei Monastyrski continued to be faithful to the poetic word. This is something that he started off with, elementary poetics, and even in the small, curious little thing, a little box with a glass ashtray and some white thread. The inscription there is hinting at a way to contemplate the subject through implementing preparations to this work. You can intensify the perception, the reality understood as a text that's ready to be interpreted is something that Andrei Monastyrski develops after his psychiatric adventure that he vividly described in the Kasher Highway novel. He lived through a psychedelic transformation, and he successfully survived this acute state. And just as in the Matrix movie, he entered a world that was open for interpretations. And this leads to a series of texts from Andrei Monastyrski dedicated to urban points that he considers to be sacral. He interprets certain places around Moscow as signs of aesthetic development. For instance, this pit where the current Lukoil building is located next to the Chistye Prudy metro, Monastyrski interpreted as a projection of poetic conceptualism of Ilya Kabakov, whose workshop would look out on this constantly dirty pit. Many years of contemplating this pit in the Monastyrski opinion led to the development of the theme of the small person, the communal living. And when the building of Lukoil was erected, this is what led to a change in the style that Kabakov was working in, getting back to the larger artistic installations and projects that came about starting from 1983. Or, for instance, the text, the Vdnh, the People's Exhibition as the center of the world, where there's a constellation of monuments that are interpreted by Monastyrski as a sort of message of the creators of this exhibition space. They're not just showcasing the accomplishments of the Soviet Union, but describes reality. Another text by Monastyrski, Moscow Charisma Rivers, at the beginning of the 10s, Monastyrski was awarded not as an artist, but as a theoretician of art and an author who writes about contemporary art. And this is something that's debatable. I'm trying to prove this to you. Monastyrski is also considered to be the author of the first video work in the history of Russian video art. In 1985, And this was his very first opportunity to do that because he got hold of a video camera. He records his conversation with the lamp. The text is as follows. Fet is reading his poetry. His reading takes about 5 to 6 minutes. That's the text. What are we talking about here? Reading Fet's poetry takes 5 to 6 minutes. I think that's wrong. About 5 verses. It's not going to take 5 minutes. Not more than 2 minutes, perhaps. But what we focused on here is the talking time rather than the content of the poem. Or another text. We need to make a note just for the fun of it. Should I put dots? Crosses? Okay, let's do it like this. And over the course of the entire video, Monastyrski discusses the relationship between Fet and Tyutchev, and he puts more dots on his chest. And this interpretation that unravels before our eyes, he shows that when Tyutchev remembers the reading of the poetry, he reads poetry as a performance, as any artistic work, and he talks about its spatial and time dimensions. So it's not letters on a sheet of paper. It's something that has volume. Monastyrski wasn't only working with poetry and the Russian avant-garde, but he was also working with the musical legacy of the 20th century. Back in the 1960s, as a young man, he started as a musician who performed Austrian Vienna works on the piano. He was interested in dodecaphony and minimalism and various musical schools. That the mid-20th century was full of. A lot of his works were targeting this musical universe that he also tries to turn into an object, into a spatial operatic narrative. For example, one of his late objects, the music of agreement, again, it has no aesthetic function at all. It's an old black box with these strange white horns. Within it, there's a small radio that would need to be connected to the radio grid, and it was always set on the 4th channel, currently Orpheus. Back then it was musical radio. I don't even remember if it had a name. Andrei Monastyrski is never going to sell this piece of art to any collection because it's a part of his everyday life, his interior, his state of moral satisfaction with the current moment. A radio affairs always plays in his apartment all the time from within this box, the musical accord. it's an attempt to bring sounds and rhythmical harmonies into the space of visual art. And this is where music gets its form. During the perestroika, Monastyrski is under no intention to change his style or the poetics of his works. He's very set on his beliefs. The new generation that came to the artistic scene sees him as not as a predecessor, not as a teacher, but as an obsolete artistic school that's taken up a post-Soviet institutionalized space and needs to be criticized and destroyed. That's when Andrei Monastyrski gives an interview to the Сегодня newspaper, Today newspaper, and in a very straightforward language, he explains that conceptualism can't be deleted in any contemporary practice, and art is grounded in his accomplishments. And when the journalist asks again, well, perhaps conceptualism will end at some point with your life, and he responds, yes, we are definitely mortal, but conceptualism is not a human being. What he's hinting at is the methods that were developed by the Moscow Conceptualist School that make it unique, unlike any other regional artistic school. They will persist and will be present in the works of the critics that came to replace it. The Moscow actionists, first and foremost, and artists that worked in the Trojprudny periodic that we're going to be talking about later in 1990. He shows his ladle. It's not a simplification, it's a very strange construct that's attempting to recreate a historical text, to recreate the works of the peasants in Korea during the medieval age. And there was a scheme of this ladle that simplified agricultural works. It was used for irrigation. This interest towards totalitarian cultures, this is what was characteristic of the Moscow Conceptual Circle, because they lived in the Soviet Union themselves and they were really interested in what was happening in North Korea. In particular, Monastyrski would receive the North Korean magazine, and in Russian it would talk about the life, the happy life in that wonderful country that came about after the horrendous war of the 1950s. And of course, the subject references the idea of an empire that's always in the process of development and destruction and endless recreation. And through this metaphor of a reconstructed historical ladle, indirectly through the Korean peasant culture, it also references the totalitarian regime. And despite the perestroika, it was always there in the background as something that might come back, that might reproduce itself. And with this work, he enters the post-Soviet era, and he's even parts of the activities of contemporary galleries. But for instance, the Regina Gallery, Andrei Kulik, a young sculptor from Kiev, was the curator. He was just at the beginning of his career. He moved to Moscow. Knowing that Andrei Monastyrski is not Ilya Kabakov, who left in 1986 and never came back to the Soviet Union since then. And he was rather a figure that was absent, and Monastyrski was considered to be the Grey Cardinal of the Circle, and he was offered this exhibition opportunity. And Monastyrski said he wasn't too interested, but if Kulik wants, he can do it for Monastyrski. He can organize a project called The Surroundings of the Regina Gallery, all of the places where Monastyrski loved to take walks, not far from the Preobrazhenskaya Plощadь metro station. And what they could find in the surroundings, there was an old cemetery. There was the Losiny Ostrov Park. There was a ceramic factory, and these three objects needed to be represented. And Kulik sends his helpers to the cemetery. They brought an abandoned tombstone, some branches and dead trees from the park, and the ceramic plant was represented by that porcelain sculpture. Just before the opening, he sends workers to the Kyrgyzstan field where the collective action group would organize a lot of their events. And that field wasn't sowed with exotic plants, and they brought some grass from this sacred location. And this is the grass that becomes the carpet that's used to exhibit this object, conceptualized, it seems, by Andrei Monastyrski. And half of the audience was indignated by Kulik's idea. A lot of them would say, for instance, one of Monastyrski's friends, the Josef Bakstein, the founder of the Contemporary Art Museum in Moscow, they said that Kulik reduced the figure of Andrei Monastyrski in the eyes of the new bourgeois public. Andrei liked the work. He saw an opportunity to infest this new generation of artists with his strange constructs, unreadable for the wider audience, but so attractive for people that even decades later were drawn not only to the texts and the volumes and the documentation of the group of collective action, but to Monastyrski texts and his works that were rarely exhibited. I know a lot of examples when in the tens, at the turn of the century, artists from other cities in Russia were severely impacted by this historical distance. Andrei Monastyrski legacy as a participant of the Kedi group had a significant influence on them. Famous objects such as the ladle, etc., were developed in the 90s through a set of installations. And the first one was this piece of art, Mosquitoes 2, Comrade 2. Comor and millimeter being referenced. They were called Komory in the Moscow underground. In this piece that was exhibited in the Center of Contemporary Art in Copenhagen, Komory as a connotation are lost in this piece. The exhibition was called No Man's Land, and it was dedicated to the art of Russia and the Russian post-Soviet installations. And Monastyrski chooses this is an abandoned Catholic cathedral that was given to the city to host a contemporary art museum, where he chooses a space under the stairway in the second floor. And this is an emergency exit. Next to the door, he hangs two plates that are a full copy of the plates of the Bashkir embassy in Moscow, in Russian and in Bashkir. And this work was even more hermetic, perhaps, than his other works. It attracted a lot of attention. It was placed in a space where it was hard to find. It drew the attention of not just Russian guests, but the local artistic community as well. They were astounded by Monastyrski aesthetic works. He was fully blocking the internal meanings, offering the viewers an opportunity to generate their own meanings. The leader of contemporary artistic world, in this sense, is the branch that was something that caused a huge scandal recently when it was purchased by the Tretyakov Gallery. This is a classical piece of the Moscow contemporary art scene. It's so hermeneutic. Here's the full text of a subsequent commentary to the object. I'll come back to the previous slide. What I wanted to point out here is what the object is made up of. It's a wooden plastic. It's a wooden panel with 4 rolls of sellotape, and there's a branch going, a dry wooden branch going through these sellotape rolls. The idea that Monastyrski later shared with those that expressed an interest in unraveling the secret, the idea was simple. The idea was that the sound is present in this piece of work as a possibility, as a potential. And nobody responded to this potential back in the 96 or subsequently. The sound is encoded in these sellotapes. It's easier to grab the rope and drag the whole branch down, and this will lead to a sound of the sellotape, and this is the sound that's encoded in the piece of art. This object, as Monastyrski wrote in 2005, is a score of a potential audio discourse. The way it's constructed is and this text came with the first exhibition of the branch, the viewer shouldn't have this need to pull the branch down, because the intonation in the text indicates that any impact interaction with this branch will be something wrong. So it would create the wrong music. So we're dealing with an object that's constructed on the border of silence and sound. It's a sound matrix that's never realized whenever the work was exhibited. Other installation pieces from the end of the 90s, the beginning of the 2000s are quite strict in their execution, usually not done by Monastyrski himself. The production is taken care of by large artistic institutions, including European and American ones, for which Andrei Monastyrski was always a welcome guest. It's not sellotape purchased in a warehouse, in a construction store. These are board constructions thought through down to the minutest detail. These are anonymized works, but this unseen object of his previous periods is always present. For instance, this fountain. There are stands in a circle with photographs of girls from the Friendship Fountain at Vdenka, taken from the back and on the inner side of the circle. So this is a fountain that's essentially turned inside out, and on the inside part is where you see the texts that accompany these photo prints, and you need to go inside the circle to have a look at them. And there's flowers scattered on the floor. When you go into the circle and then go out of the circle, you leave footprints that connect the fountain with other works in this group exhibition. And this work is connected with other objects, and this is how it loses its hermeneutic nature, particularly for the Western.
Трудно переводимое, теряющееся в переводе знание контекста восполняется как раз той функцией, которая всегда Монастырского привлекала при создании художественных работ. Казалось бы, как можно непонятное сделать понятным в перенесении из родного контекста в контекст чужой, но именно это свойство делает работы московских концептуалистов, последователей Монастырского, более прозрачными для западного зрителя, чем самые простые работы современных авторов, молодых. Другая работа Гёте была показана в 2007 году на Кассельской документе, и это была первая реализация замысла 1976 года, которая была, в общем-то, привязана к идее элементарной поэзии, к Пушке, к Пальцу. И заключалась она в следующем. Она была абсолютно незаметна, и для того, чтобы ее найти, надо было тщательно вчитываться в путеводитель. Но принцип заключался в следующем. На вот этом слайде слева вверху.
The principle was as follows. On the top, you can see a button located at the entrance of the building, and there is an inscription in German that urges you to press the button, but nothing would happen. Strangely enough, you press the button and nothing happens, no flashes, no sounds. But when you press the button, it's a gift to somebody who got to the end of the exhibition, because it's at the end of the exhibition is where you can see a column, a sound bar, and then you would see this sudden, frightening sound. Another example of this impossibility to offer an interpretation of a performance is also demonstrated by Murmansky, or darkness installation by Monastyrski that was exhibited at one of the first exhibitions at Vinzavod in one of the shops. He installed a big metal pipe that he suggested to explore by looking inside. There was a bright electric light, and as soon as you would get closer to this pipe, hoping to see something inside it, the light would go off. And this darkness explored the impossibility of conveying a message at a distance, and an impossibility of grasping the interpreting mind. The Soviet critics would love to have, and even the Western critics would love to give a single interpretation to a piece of work. And here, what's highlighted is this impossibility. Monastyrski suggests recreating meaning every time when every single viewer approaches the subject, hoping to see a message from the past. Next Thursday, we're going to be looking at Nikita Alexeev's works that I didn't have time to cover today. This is going to be our 8th meeting, part 2. To wrap up today's session, I would like to show you another strange piece that Andrei Monastyrski got help with from Boris Groys, his longtime friend and another member of the Moscow Conceptual School. Andrei Monastyrski becomes one of the main characters of the Venice Biennale Russia Pavilion. He shows again a very hermeneutic piece that has to do with the history of collective actions and Venice as the place that can potentially become a field for the interaction of a performer and an unsuspecting viewer. Among the objects, there were these wooden logs that reminded of a wooden prison, a barrack interior, and within the center of the main hall, there would be these pillars that were brought from the Venice Laguna, that gondolas and boats are usually tied to. They are tied with chains. And they can be perceived as a sort of a projection of the unity that was established in Moscow back in 1975 when Andrei Monastyrski and Nikita Alexeev and Lev Rubinstein, together with other members of the circle, came up with this idea of collective action. This Venetian paraphrase of eternal friendship and co-authorship in the context of a totalitarian system wasn't understood by everybody. but in my view, it's a great illustration for our transition to other works of Nikita Alexeev, a close friend to Andrei Monastyrski, and the story of collective action as the main group that essentially was at the epicenter of the Moscow Conceptual School and that played the function of an institutionalized construction when official artistic life was absolutely impossible for these authors. I will wrap up my talk with this for today. And then if you have any questions, please go ahead. Please use the microphone so that the people over Zoom can hear us. Thank you so much for your lecture. There was a question on whether there was any dialogue between SOTS art artist and conceptualist artist, perhaps at the level of exhibition organization. And so if we talk about the post-Soviet period, then of course they would meet at the various underground retrospective exhibitions. And that would happen inevitably. How do we tell the story of conceptual underground art if we don't consistently go from A to B, Isaac, and then the flood, and then etc., etc. But as part of the 70s processes, these ties were very indirect. There was this famous exhibition from 1976 when the Moscow underground, as a way of protest, decided to one more time organize a series of exhibitions in private apartments. And not everybody was accepted into official halls. Not everybody who was accepted could exhibit something. So a campaign was organized. Apartment exhibitions would pop up across the entire city of Moscow. And this was a way of getting everybody together, surrealists next to Impressionism and abstract art, and the groups would be all mixed up. And it's all inscribed into a very messy interior. Leonid Sokov, a SOTS artist that we've already talked about, decided to open up his workshop to showcase a group of artists that couldn't be considered somebody who followed his ideas. Igor Shilkovsky, a sculptor, who was his friend, and he worked at the border, the threshold of the legacy of the 60s. And Rima Valery Gerlovina, who was far from Sokov's work. These were authors that can't be considered to be a part of the Sotsav movement at all. But this exhibition showcased the fact that SOTS art is just a style, whereas conceptual art is a method. And through this circle, yes, they did interact, particularly when Dmitry Prigov started to play a role. And he held this intermediary position between his classmates, SOTS artists mostly, and the circle of the Moscow Conceptualist School that he held constant contact with, that he made various presentations together with at various underground exhibition and concert projects. So something like that. Are there any further questions? No further questions. There is one. The objects that contain other objects are not to be opened, I assume. but it's something that provokes me to open it. Sasha, we're all in this dilemma, as with the branch. Do we destroy the work of art to make this sound? Do we destroy the piece of work as an anatomist to see its insides, and then you kill the work through this action? There is this famous story. Has anybody ever opened a can of Manzoni? And that's another work I was thinking about. You said that you held the piece of work. Has anybody ever opened it? No, no. In 85, he tied the knots. They're dusty, they're dirty, but they're there. Walking is now held by Pompidou. Several years ago, when they were working on building up the Russian collection, they snatched the subject from Monastyrski, and I'm really sorry that it's not in Russia anymore. It's a classical example that if you open it up, you'll destroy it. I like the fact that I don't know what's inside it. And it wasn't by accident that I compared him to French conceptualisms. They love these sort of constructs in art. If you remember Magritte, with all these covers that conceal the genuine image. And for me, it's not just one of his methods that was then inherited by hermeneutic artists, etc., but it indicates the fact that Moscow conceptualism as a regional movement is also part of this surrealistic distortion experience, not in Salvador Dali's style, but I'm talking about Andrei Breton's surrealistic revolution. That talks about erecting a category that can't be interpreted. It's a category of the impossible, a category of the unseen, of the invisible, and it's not conceptualism. It's definitely something that's characteristic more for surrealistic vision. Thank you. Okay, then, if there are no further questions, we'll see you in a week. Another question. So if this work is held by a private collector, it can be destroyed, right? Well, of course, if you own the piece of work, you can do whatever you want with it. You can throw it out into the garbage. You can open it up. But if you are a collector, you are not just a fetishist, you are an investor. You're not le bourgeois gentilhomme. You know what you're doing. And when you spend so much money and then destroying this piece of work that later on your children can sell at a much higher price would be crazy. I don't know anybody who would perform such a crazy act. It's like buying Rembrandt and cutting it up into pieces to see what it's made of. Like if you cut it up into 100 little pieces. Just imagine Shukin or Morozov, they buy Matisse that didn't cost much in the bigger market, would then say, well, I'm going to repaint it myself, paint over it. They knew that this is the art that's going to be valued in the future, that's going to be cherished by others. Andrei Monastyrski told me, well, it's definitely provocative. He was astounded by the fact that nobody thought back in '96 in Moscow he thought somebody would pull the rope or pull the branch down. Well, nobody did that. It's like a flute with no holes. That's another metaphor he had for this branch. And everybody decided to look at it instead of playing their own music through it, having destroyed it, but at least play the melody. So there. Okay, then we will see you next week. I'm really happy that you came and come again.